Hello, Kostas from Veridise here, and today we're going to be discussing a new initiative of the Stellar ecosystem called the Stellar Security Audit Bank. And I have with me here today Tomer from Stellar Foundation. Thank you for joining us, Tomer, today.
Glad to be here.
And for those who don't know, the Security Audit Bank is a system that the Stellar ecosystem has put forward. So projects that build on top of Stellar and specifically on top of Soroban, they can seek out third-party security reviews from outside companies. And we think that is a very kind of like, neat program because in a industry where kind of like security is very reactive after like a security incident, for example. We think this kind of like flips the narrative and make like security kind of like a proactive. So let me ask you, what inspired like this program? Was it like a specific like incident or like a challenge that you were trying to solve for people building on top of Soroban?
Sure. So last year we launched Soroban, which is our new smart contracts runtime based on WebAssembly with the main SDK in Rust. And so as we were looking into the space, Stellar is a robust network, been around since 2015, extremely trusted by traditional financial institutions and a lot of players in the crypto ecosystem. We want to make sure that we maintain the same level of robustness and trust when we launch this smart contracts runtime. Obviously, smart contracts expose a whole new surface area for various security considerations. And so it was very important for us both to build a very robust security first infrastructure and product and tech stack, and I'm happy to get into the details there. But also, we wanted to engage with top security experts and the ecosystem, and we also recognize that especially for builders that are just getting started, it can be quite challenging to even kind of like the sheer kind of financial cost of audits. And so, what we've done is set up the audit bank. The audit bank gives developers a free audit if they meet a specific set of criteria, and as the protocol grows and the TVL grows, we offer additional security audits. And so we work with a set of auditors that are whitelisted, Veridise included, and we're Soroban launched around a year and a half ago. We're very happy to see that there haven't been any major vulnerabilities in the ecosystem yet. And I do think that in part is due to the audit bank.
All right, yeah. That's quite interesting because like we also believe that like this kind of like removes the friction in like our industry where like people have to choose whether to deliver fast or secure. And like now we believe like with this kind of like new way of scheduling audits, people can like sit both like secure and in a timely manner. So can you give us a little bit more detail about how the whole program works, like from the perspective of a project? What do they have to do to get like an audit out of it?
Yeah, so one of the big funding vehicles in the Stellar ecosystem is called the Stellar Community Fund, which is a program that we at the foundation run together with the ecosystem, in which delegates choose to give funding to different projects. And if a DeFi protocol makes it into the Stellar Community Fund and into kind of like the final acceptance criteria, then effectively they get an audit by one of the vetted auditors sponsored by SDF.
All right. Okay, that's great. And so yeah, we also see this kind of like as a move forward to kind of like be like proactive when it comes to security. So for Stellar and like Soroban specifically, what are kind of like the type of like bugs or vulnerabilities you are expecting this program to catch like sooner than later, like before a project goes public?
Yeah, so I would say that, first of all, we would really like for most bugs to be found during testing. We're very bullish on testing. And so, Stellar and Soroban were really built from the ground up for testability. And so, test-driven development we think is a must in the DeFi ecosystem. It's not like a possible paradigm. It's the paradigm that you have to follow. And so we have various levels of testability and testing infrastructure in Soroban. So we have an entire local testing mode, which means that you can actually run unit testing, like Rust unit tests, very fast, very efficiently, without even running a blockchain, without even going into WebAssembly, just kind of like fast testing. We can also do integration testing using that. We have the entire SDK supporting prop testing and fuzzing, so you can use cargo fuzz to fuzz your program. We also collaborated with some players in the tooling space to make sure that there's tooling available for more like static analysis and formal verification. So for example, CoinFabric released their Scout tool, which does some basic static analysis. We also have a collaboration with Certora, which is probably kind of like the leading company in the space for formally verifying smart contracts. And so we really want developers to use that. We have a lot of documentation, but we recognize that at the end of the day, there's nothing as good as having a professional set of eyes on it. And so we we work with you guys and a set of other auditors. I think that a lot of the basic vulnerabilities that you see in other ecosystems, you don't see in Stellar just because it was built from the ground up for security. So, things like reentrancy attacks are just not possible on Stellar, so you don't see them. And a lot of quirks that relate to safe math and to specific idiosyncratic issues with the EVM, you just don't see them because Soroban is just kind of like more um, logical and sensible as a runtime. I do think there are some things that are unique in Stellar and Soroban, and these things might be sources of confusion and potential bugs. These are state archival. So the way that Stellar mitigates against the problem of state bloat in blockchains is that we have a system of state archival in which the persistent state or persistent data entries can be evacuated and removed from the ledger, but they can also be restored later on. And so the question is, what happens if your contract relies on state that doesn't exist right now, is something that the developer needs to be mindful of. And so I think developing against state is something that's like really interesting and unique to Stellar, because we also have like a multi-tier state system. So you can also just use temporary state, which is actually much more performant and much less costly in terms of resource fees. But I do think that, and I recommend to builders in the ecosystem to actually look at all the audit reports that are out there, because we mandate as part of the audit bank that all reports are open source. And so there is like a great corpus of around 40 to 50 audit reports right now that developers can look at and learn from previous experience. So for example, what I said about state, in the beginning, we saw a lot of projects run into these issues, but more and more, now that the knowledge exists in the ecosystem, we see less of these issues.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty interesting actually. Like that, one project can learn from the mistakes of another, and that like brings me to like another point here that is kind of like is very interesting that the Stellar Foundation has set up this bank and kind of pushes security early on in the projects. Do you see that as a kind of like a blueprint where like other ecosystems kind of learn and copy kind of like a similar structure?
You probably have a better answer for that question. I'll ask you that in a second. But yes, like hard yes. Like we're seeing other ecosystems follow. I think sometimes ecosystems do it at the wrong time, which is after a hack happened, and they're like, "Oh shit, we need to do something to protect our ecosystem," because at the end of the day, especially for like the more nascent ecosystems out there, the reputation of a blockchain, of an L2 or whatever, is really intertwined with the security of its protocols. And so if you have a hack in your ecosystem, it doesn't matter if if it's not a bug in your system, it projects a bad image for the entire ecosystem. So I think a lot of protocols and a lot of networks are understanding that, and we're seeing a lot of them adopt this model. Um, Sometimes, unfortunately, it's after a hack. I'm really proud of us in the Stellar ecosystem to have got a head start on this. And by the way, you know, this does relate to the fact that we had like a late mover advantage into the world of DeFi and smart contracts. And so we had an opportunity to look around, see what works, see what doesn't, and make sure that we target that both with the product and the tech, but also with how to get the ecosystem ready. But I am very curious. Obviously, you work with other networks, not just Stellar, unfortunately. And so, what are you seeing in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, like it's always kind of like a weird kind of like trade-off of like, when projects come to us for like an audit. First of all, like, everybody cares about speed, right? Like, the first thing they tell you is like, how long is gonna take. And like, that's a very hard question to answer from our perspective, but we are always proud to see uh, projects that like they have kind of like built security from the get-go. Like you see like a robust test case. There is like some sort of like threat modeling described like somewhere in a document where like it's clear to see like that they have thought of like what can go wrong. So yeah, I mean, like unfortunately, that's not the case for every network. But like we have been like we would have been like extremely happy if like that was kind of like
Yeah.
the. And we see that like a lot of times like we kind of like as an auditing firm we might complain like in the general recommendation and say like in order to like increase robustness and like be more future proof, you have to implement like this set of guidelines, and then like unfortunately we might see some like pushback on that, but other times like people just like
Yeah, so I think a nice thing from our perspective is, having, we actually just made some adjustments to the audit bank process, and we actually require, a set of things from these protocols before they can actually apply for an audit bank, and we make sure that they have these in place. And so, we have a lot of documentation around how to actually prepare for an audit, both in terms of making sure that you have like, a significant test story, also to have some threat analysis, but also just to describe your invariants and what are your kind of like assumptions for how the protocol works. It's surprising that a lot of protocols don't actually do that, and so I think just having a clear specification, and it doesn't have to be in a formal language like Certora. Just write down what it is that your protocol actually does, including all the edge cases. And even just by writing that, you see that protocols start realizing, oh, actually, there's this edge case that I haven't handled.
Yeah. And like that's also our experience because like if like a project doesn't contain like this structure, for us it's kind of like the first step we'll do. It's like we'll try to list all of these cases and then we'll go ask them, and like then they realize, oh, there is like actually like a thing that we missed. Okay, so moving forward here, like how would you evaluate what it means for this audit bank program to be successful?
Well, it's hard to answer that question. First of all, we want the amount of money lost to hacks and bugs to be zero. That would be kind of like the best case scenario. Um, I think putting metrics around it is really difficult because if you're looking at number of bugs found, that could be a good metric. That can also be a really bad metric, right? It can mean that like protocols are going into this process without having actually done the legwork to ensure that the service level stuff is not there. And so number of bugs are not great. Also number of audits, because if you have audits that are just kind of like checking a box of an audit, that's not great, because the what we like to see in a good auditor, and by the way, I do think that Veridise is a great example of that, is we want to see an auditor that's like really curious, that tries to have like a deep understanding of this protocol, that they're auditing. And so a lot of times, even when you don't have significant findings, just having like this really deep technical document that clears up the technical specification and the kind of like risk threat modeling, I think that already is like very significant. So in a lot of ways, we look at this more in a qualitative rather than a quantitative way.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And we at Veridise, yeah, we kind of like believe that secure applications like are built on top of like like secure foundation, and like Stellar already kind of like does that by introducing like all of these tools for like projects that built on top of like Soroban. So if like if somebody out there is building on top of Soroban, what will be like an advice you have to give them, like how to get things kind of like right, and go through all these steps you just described?
Yeah, so we have a lot of documentation in our dev docs around security. We actually just published a new set of documents around security a few weeks ago, and so definitely go to the website, learn about it. Go to the Stellar Developer Discord. There is an extremely friendly community of developers at Stellar, and I think that they're just kind of like asking questions, learning from existing protocols because everyone is super available, reading previous audits and learning from previous findings. I think that is like super beneficial, and just engage with the Stellar ecosystem because we really would love to help you.
Okay. And talking for specifically for security, any tips or tricks on what vulnerabilities to avoid, like on top of Soroban?
Yeah, definitely learn about the different storage tiers. Storage we've seen is kind of like because Stellar has a fairly novel mechanism of storage, we've seen this come up again and again as potential a layer for misunderstanding. So there's basically kind of like three tiers of storage. There's what we call instance storage, which is this very limited ledger entry that you can attach information to, that is kind of like attached to your contract. You don't need to worry about state archival at all, but it's a very limited amount of information. So very, like pool parameters, configuration, or just like finite state. We have what we call temporary state, which is very cheap state. So that's kind of like the recommended way to store data that is not financially meaningful.
Mhm.
So, if you have like an Oracle information that is relevant for like 10 minutes, great, put it in temporary storage. It doesn't need to live forever in the ledger. And then we have persistent storage, which is kind of like the highest tier of storage. You really want to reserve that mostly for financially meaningful information. So things like balances or positions in DeFi, for example. And so definitely, study storage. I think that's a really important thing. And also, like at the end of the day, the Stellar contract SDK is really Rust, and so what we find is that people that come with knowledge from the Rust ecosystem and with Rust know-how, for example, the fuzzing framework that we have is usable using cargo fuzz, which is very common in the Rust ecosystem. So a lot of this information is transferable from the Rust ecosystem. So we tried very hard to make sure that Stellar and Soroban specifically is idiomatic for Rust developers.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, like we're also huge fan of Rust, and like the guarantees it gives you. So, and also like I would like to second your concerns about storage, because like in our experiences and the audits that we have done, like that's kind of like the one thing that has come up, like that is specific to Soroban. Of course, you have like business logic bugs and stuff like that, but anyway, so zooming out a little bit, it seems that Soroban is becoming like very central to the development of the whole like Stellar ecosystem, and it's becoming like increasingly more critical to like carrying out like Stellar's main mission. So, any exciting developments in the near future, 6 to 12 months ahead, that we are expecting to see?
Yeah, so first, it's worth mentioning that Stellar's been around since 2015, really focused on real world utility and equitable access. And so a lot of what we've built in the past 10 years, not just smart contracts and DeFi, has really been about payments and these kind of like everyday financial instruments. And so now, everyone's talking about stable coins. Everyone's into stable coins right now. Stellar has been there since 2015. And we have a really robust set of infrastructure around on and off ramping to and from stablecoins around the world. For example, you can walk into any MoneyGram agent around the world, more than 400,000 locations, and turn your USDC on Stellar to cash. And what we're seeing is, the stablecoin layer is kind of like the checking account of of this new economy, and then DeFi and RWAs are bringing these other layers of everyday financial instruments. So you can think of an RWA as your savings account, and you can think of the various DeFi instruments as your kind of like investment vehicles. And we're seeing like a very complete set of everyday financial instruments coming into play here. And with Soroban, we really feel like the network is feature complete. And so the things we're working on right now are more about scalability and usability. Stellar is already kind of like a high throughput network. We want to increase that. The block times are 5 seconds right now. We're looking to reduce that. And so there's a lot of work around that and scalability. I do think from an application layer perspective, one of the things that we're putting a strong emphasis on right now is the world of privacy. We're talking with a lot of traditional financial institutions who are coming into this world, and one of their biggest concerns is privacy, both from just being compliant perspective, but also from the perspective of protecting your users, protecting merchants. We don't want merchants to spill out all their secret finance on chain, and so privacy is slowly becoming more and more important. And so we're making some investments there. We're working on bringing ZK infrastructure on the crypto side, and also working directly with a few companies in the ecosystem on actually prototyping these payment solutions, from confidential payments to privacy pools and a bunch of other protocols. And we're going to be sharing more and more about that. But I am curious, you guys are also working a lot on ZK and privacy. What are you seeing in the space right now? What do we as Stellar need to put an emphasis on as we engage with privacy protocols and with zero knowledge infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, like, in Veridise, we have audited, like, a lot of, like, ZK-based protocols, like, ZK VMs and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to, like, keep your ear to the ground, right? Like, see what are the latest development, because, like, the space kind of, like, moves fast. Pick, like, the best technology that fits, like, your use case in terms of, like, proving times and stuff like that. And also, like, I think usability is, like, something that hasn't been talked, like, as much, because, like, it's hard to explain, like, Web3 to, like, everyday kind of, like, user. If you start putting, like, ZK into the mix, like, things are becoming, even more complex. So yeah, I think, like, these two things, like, will kind of, like, make sure that, like, it will be accessible to users and, like, usable from the get-go. And we are also excited to hear about, like, these developments, since we're excited to, like, audit and, like, read more ZK code. All right, that's all I had for you today. Thank you a lot for your time. Any closing words you want to say?
No. If you're interested in building secure everyday financial instruments, come to Stellar and get audited by Veridise.
Okay.
Awesome auditors.
Cool. Thank you so much.